they didn't like the concept that, oh, well, you had to ask for them. And if you didn't ask, you didn't get. And it was based on who asked and how much they asked for, and things like that. Where this group of 5 council members wants to embrace something that would use a data-driven process to decide where the needs are in the city and to maybe reallocate resources based on that data. Now, I've been in the business of allocating resources my entire career at the city, and it's not easy. And you know, there's equality versus equity are often 2 different things. And one of the discussions at council, which was pretty illustrative of this, was that a council member from District 10 said, well, I don't have a pool, I don't have as many parks, I don't have as many community facilities in District 10 as other districts. Kind of an equality argument. The council member from District 5 spoke up quite emotionally and said, look, we have pools, we have parks, we need pools, we need parks more than you do because our people live in apartments. Whereas your people go out into the backyard and barbecue. I mean, this was exactly what was said.
That was in the paper.
Yeah, it was in the article, yes. I'm not making this stuff up, but this is what the discussion was, and it went on for hours. So the 2 different proposals, a proposal came from council, from the 5 council members, which is almost a majority, it takes 6 votes, to set aside $500,000 for an equity fund, which could be used to address some of those things. The city manager's office noted that if they were going to do that, they needed some staff to do that. It was going to cost another $430,000 to sort of, further the efforts that the city's already doing, which I'll tell you about in a minute, and to sort of administer such a fund. So the mayor didn't like either of those 2 things. He said, I'm not willing to support it at that level, and he thinks that separating equity from the rest of the budget demeaned equity. And he actually said that he thought it disrespected equity. So there was quite an emotional battle about those concepts. So what the mayor has proposed, and what eventually did pass with some amendment, is that he wants to utilize needs data being developed by a couple of organizations. Something called the Social Progress Imperative and something called the Government Alliance for Racial Equity. Both of these agencies, you can look at their websites. They are nationwide efforts that are striving to develop this data that points out where inequities occur in such things as food equity, energy equity, access to this, access to that. Food equity is one that you might have heard of. That's where people in certain neighborhoods are deprived of food because no grocery stores will locate them. All they have is 7-Elevens and fast food joints. So the chances of your kid getting a fresh apple or something like that are pretty low because there's no stores that sell them. So it's that kind of equity that they're dealing with. It's the structural things that would maybe change zoning, change incentives to corporations and businesses to locate in areas like that. That is the kind of thing that they're advocating so that there's something to address this inequity of access to these things. So you can see they actually call themselves the Government Alliance for Racial Equity, which is interesting, and it really is the central focus, but I think the effort is to broaden that so that it's social equity more than racial equity, because that's going to face obviously some challenges here and there. So what the mayor basically said and tried to, his word was shoehorn the things that he had allocated to council members, shoehorn them into the things that are addressing these types of inequities around the city. So he did a pretty lengthy job of saying that we're going to look at this allocation, say it's traffic calming. We're going to look at how we spend our traffic calming dollars through this equity screen that says, well, it's not just which council member screams the loudest or the complaints we hear. It's going to be some objective data that decides that we need traffic calming here. Could be accident data, pedestrian deaths, things like that. So he's saying that everything needs to be looked at from that screen or lens. Well, the discussion went on, we don't have that lens right now. How do we get that information? You know, we're going to set up $500,000 to move that along. So the compromise, after it turns out to be, yes?
Do they have a time frame for coming up with the sort of indicators?
They did not.
They don't.
But they said they all agreed they needed to do something about it. And so the compromise, that there were a couple things discussed, but basically they all agreed that they ought to have a study session. So there will be a study session summer, fall, sometime soon. They didn't say, to sort of get their heads around this concept, look at some criteria, methods for the needs assessment and resource allocation. So they're going to have we used to call them committees of the whole. It's a study session now to sort of get their arms around this sort of thing. There was a debate about whether to go ahead with the mayor's allocation based on his equity screen. Some said it was not the time to do that. Others said we don't want to wait to get those goodies. We need some of those goodies now. So let's let that go forth, have our study session, and then we'll be in a better position to do such decision making in the future. So this was like one of the biggest conceptual discussions that I've witnessed our council go through. So that's why I'm bringing it up. It's a whole different way of looking at resource allocation and needs. I mean, articles in the paper basically said it's complaints versus data. And complaints are not equitable because you only listen to the complainers, and the people who don't have a voice or don't complain are shut out of the process. And that's kind of the argument for increased access to those points of view through data. And hopefully it's objective data. So, like I said, we actually accepted that message, and so the $4.3 billion budget message was approved with some of those caveats about the study session, and looking forward to that. For us, I think we should be definitely tuned in to this process for the stakeholder involvement on retirement, because that's going to be the precursor to whatever happens next time there's a crisis. That is going to be looked at. Well, back then, you said this. Now we're in a crisis. What do we do? So on both sides, it'd be nice to hear an objective and calm discussion about ways to deal with that. And then I think you're going to see much more in the future about this equity discussion, how that gets developed, how it gets applied. I think we're entering an era of equity in budget decisions right now. So that's, if you're ever going to be interested in budgeting, that might be something you can be interested in. So that's basically it. So if anybody has questions, yeah.
Brooke, when people ask questions, Brooke, would you repeat them so we'll be picked up here?
Okay.
Thanks.
Dave.
I always wondered, so you reported on 1.3 billion, and then there's like 5 billion, right?
4.3.
4.3, is that on top of the
That
1.3?
includes the 1.2.
So there is over $5 billion.
No, the 4.3 is the total. Of that, 1.2 is the budget.
Okay,
for
okay.
general.
So the majority of the budget is in capital what? Things like what?
This building is a capital
Okay.
improvement. This park,
But they're just separate funds?
yes, there's many separate funds in capital as
Like
well.
airport and water.
And there's special funds, special operating funds, and capital funds. The airport is run on its own operating fund and capital fund.
Why wouldn't they include all of it? If you talk equity, why wouldn't they include everything?
Oh, well, they should. Now, some of that stuff is not going to be generally applicable to the general population. The airport stuff is mainly concerned with the enterprise. We call it an enterprise fund because it's run more like a business than government. It's run as a money-making operation. The airport fund is supported by airport revenues, not general tax revenues. So it's a little different way of thinking. That's why it's separate. So there may be need to do some equity looking at that. I don't know what that would be, but it's possible.
Where's the treatment plant today? That's
Joe says, where's the treatment plant? Same sort of thing. The treatment plant is run also as an enterprise fund, and it's supported by if you look on your property tax bill, there'll be a line item on there, buried in a bunch of them, that says your sewer service and use charge tax. And that is relatively, if you break it down by flush, it's pretty cheap. But it's a few $100s based on.
Why wouldn't they put the pension in a separate fund like the water pollution control plan?
Well, because the pension is not self-supporting, that's part of the problem. Pension is not supported by the employees and the interest income from investments.
But neither is the airport.
Well, the pension fund needs to be supported by general tax revenues. That's why it's controversial.
Are you aware of any, like any ads or deletions from?
Sorry?
Are you aware of any ads or deletions from the budget, like more for parks and maintenance or they're kind of?
They're in there, and I invite you to read the budget. There's just so many. I mean, this thing is 800 pages long, and even these messages are 50 pages long. So there are, if you're interested in parks, you can find that.
So I guess the more general question is, some years there's lots of cuts, some years there's ads. How would you characterize this year?
Well, there's no cuts, and there hasn't been cuts for the last 2 or 3 years because our fiscal situation is stabilized. We're just adding 209 net positions. We added another couple hundred last year, so things have been going well. The only deletions are things that were one-time in nature, programs and projects that are being deleted. Yes, Joe?
the 209 positions added, how many are public safety?
That's a good question. I don't have that breakdown on the top of my head, but
Most of them are.
I think we've had significant public safety ads in the last 2 or 3 years. I remember talking in slides that there was some very large. So you saw that public safety response time graph. That was augmented because we did a lot of officers added. I think that the vacancy rate is getting lower. There's more officers on staff now. They're actually getting close to historic levels.
And fire.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, Brooke, one of the things the budget message the mayor had was pay down debt, build operating reserves to prepare for the next inevitable downturn.
Right.
When this is adopted, what do the reserves look like compared to the past, compared to a normal allocation for reserves?
Well, just as an example, there's just added another $4-point-something million into a reserve because the end of the year last year, the state decided to give us another $5 million in sales tax receipts that we didn't know was coming. So there's a lot of savings from prior years. There's additional revenues that weren't expected, things like that. And we're up into the tens of millions of dollars in additions to reserve. And most of the stuff that was funded, mayor's adds to the budget, was funded from either ongoing money that wasn't expected or one-time money that wasn't expected. And they've been doing a good job of holding off on ongoing expenses because we're not sure the ongoing revenues are going to be there. So they've been very fiscally conservative by using one-time reserves to do one-time stuff. And it's the discipline that they've learned going through these hard times. There's substantial reserves out there. So, yeah. Okay.
One thing on the equity thing, Stockton, it's my understanding that Stockton came in with equity and said that they want to give like 800 people in the city $1,000 a month to pull their equity up as far as getting out of poverty. And that seems to be a conversation that's going on across the nation. And so this equity thing is not going to go away.
As Dave, to repeat the question, Dave is mentioning a program in Stockton which recently decided to give cash payments to residents to ease them out of crises, whether it's an inability to pay rent or something like that. And actually, a lot of local cities have been discussing the same thing, particularly with the high cost of rents, about rental assistance payments and things like that, because people are becoming homeless because they don't have the ability to rent. And the rate of increase in homelessness is tremendous. And if you look at the census, we have it's faster growing now than ever. So they're looking at any and every way to address that kind of inequity. At the same time, like Milpitas, I was just there last week, and turned down pretty vociferous effort to have rent control and some means of addressing the high cost of housing. Turned it down. Mountain View just decided that they're going to make it illegal to have an RV, live in an RV on the streets. And I don't know if you saw, there's a reporter up in Mountain View yesterday, across the street from Google, talking about the Google issues, and the backdrop was this street just lined with RVs. There were people living because they can't afford, they have a job at Google, they can't afford to rent or buy, so they're living in these RVs. It's a problem, and what they're talking about here with the potential $54 million would be a nice chunk of change to deal with some of that stuff. Okay, Dave, anything else?
Well, I'll think so.
Great presentation, though.
All right.
Thank you.
Cut it off.